We are pleased to be joined now by Brock Long, former FEMA administrator in the Trump administration and is now the executive chairman of Hagerty Consulting. Pleasure to have you on. I really appreciate getting your thoughts and your insights on all of this. You believe that, look, if we're going to handle this situation, it can't just necessarily come from the federal government or the state government as well, that there has to be some type of cooperation with the private sector. Explain exactly the way these things are going to be best handled in the future and now, as a matter of fact, with coronavirus.
Hey, Brian, that's a great question. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. So all disaster response, whether it's natural hazards or a pandemic event like what we're facing, is a team sport. And typically the successful framework of responding to these is disasters are federally supported, state managed, and locally executed. And I think that's what's being lost here. All disasters begin and end at the local level. And typically what happens is when, you see a local state of emergency issued in this event, then you're going to see, once the local capacity is exceeded, they can call upon a governor's help. And then governors walk through typically a formality by issuing a state of emergency so that it frees up budget money, it frees up the authorities, or gives the governor more authority to mobilize people, personnel, equipment, financial resources to help aid to cover the cost of the response. And then once a state's capacity has been exceeded, the federal government steps in. And I think we've lost sight of that. The most important thing that has to take place right now is personal responsibility and making sure that we fully are paying attention to the local public health guidance that is specific to Baltimore or where you live,
right?
Rather than what's being portrayed in the national news media.
Well, do you think there should be a national message, or do you think it should be from the local level? Because obviously things are different here, different in Miami, different in Dallas versus what you're seeing in Washington State, for example. But do you think there should be a national message, or should it be at the regional level?
Well, for pandemics, the CDC and HHS are in charge. FEMA plays a secondary role for this. And so, yes, I do believe that the CDC and HHS should be providing overall policy and guidance, down to a state governor and ultimately to the local level, which you are seeing in some cases. For example, the CDC puts out a lot of great guidance that you should take a look at. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to your specific when it comes to the authorities of actions being taken, a lot of that is going to be done at the local level through local public health. They have a lot of authority, and state public health has a lot of authority to implement separation tactics and different mitigation tactics that you may see in the future.
Well, how difficult is this? We're talking with Brock Long, who's the former FEMA administrator and is now in consulting, executive chairman of Hagerty Consulting. How difficult is this? Because normally when you think of especially with FEMA, it's hey, there's a hurricane comes in, a tornado comes in, things like that. This is that has the potential to be impacting across the country. So how much more difficult does that make it for the bureaucracy of government, the red tape that is out there, especially?
Well, Brian, another great question. Here's the thing: we have a ton of experience with hurricanes and earthquakes and tornadoes and floods. When it comes to pandemics, the last time we've walked through this was in H1N1 in 2009. And if you look at where we are today, the measures that are being implemented, travel restrictions from Europe now, travel restrictions back in early January to China, these are unprecedented moves that the government really has not, taken before. And because we don't have experience with this virus, we don't know a lot about it. I don't think that the numbers that we're dealing with right now are even remotely accurate. Quite frankly, there's just too many unknowns. So we have to lean forward in taking action, to be able to prevent the future spread of this thing.
On that note, we do get a lot of drugs from China. There's this, chain supply that is out there for all kinds of different things, not just medical supplies, but drugs and things like that. Does that expose a weakness that we have in this country right now?
Absolutely. It absolutely does. And I think that, right now the immediate fight is protecting lives. But when we get to a point where we're doing after actions of this whole event, I think it's exposed major weaknesses in our public health supply chains. We are way too dependent on other countries for antivirals, for equipment. It's my understanding, for example, that we grow a lot of cotton in this country, but we don't produce any gauze pads, different or wound bandaging that would be needed for hospitals after, surgery or, for our soldiers in the field. We're way too dependent on other countries, and we need to basically buy America again within the supply chains that we've set up within the public health arena. I think it's a time to reset, retool, and rethink the way that we do these things.
I always like to ask these questions of experts, of infectious disease doctors or anybody else in the situation. That is, what are you telling your employees? What are you telling your family members right now about coronavirus?
Well, it's interesting. My wife and I have been preparing for this for well over a month now. I think that it's inevitable in some cases, not that we want to cause panic and everybody needs to rush to the grocery store, but I think over time, there is a real possibility that you could be asked to shelter in place in your home. And are you prepared to do that for a long duration? And so, like, for example, we have been taking the initiative of controlling our own destiny as much as possible by getting ready. And, and Americans, unfortunately, we don't have a culture of preparedness in this country, Brian. It's something that we have to work on. We have to give people tangible skills again. We have to let people know that, a lot of times during disasters, they have to be able to protect themselves as well as, rely on some support from different levels of government. Right now, here's the thing. I don't like the information that's going out, for example, of, well, most people that get this virus, will just have almost, minor symptoms or like common cold symptoms. The problem is that the transmission rate of this, or what they call the R0 rate, is very high. So you may give it to someone who is very susceptible to this, and it could kill them. And, we have to be very careful and very diligent about practicing solid hygiene right now. I do not have a problem with schools and communities leaning way forward to talk about cancellation of events. I think the action that the NCAA took was very bold yesterday. A lot of people will second guess that. But I don't think that we can be too cautious when it comes to pandemic events at this point, because we just don't have a lot of experience. There's a lot of things that we don't know. And, we're all in this together.
All right. Very good. Brock, pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much for your time and your insights. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian. Take care.
No, you too. Brock Long, who is the former FEMA administrator for President Trump from 2017, 2019, and is now in the consulting business, Hagerty Consulting. His thoughts on coronavirus and what we have and where we may be going. 725 on WBAL.